How would you approach your prayer life if God gave you a second chance and raised you from the dead? What sacrifices would you be willing to make to attain your salvation or help others who are in need of your prayers? If you could experience just a fraction of the pains endured by those in the place of expiation, how much of an impact would this have on your faith? How much would this draw you closer to God? Reading pious books is a great way to bring us closer to God and strengthen our faith. One such book is Purgatory by Rev Francois Schouppe. Hi, and welcome to another video. If you're new here, please do me a favor. Hit the subscribe button. It helps tremendously with the channel. And with that being said, it has pleased God to give certain holy persons a small share in the pains of expiation. The historian Pisovius, in his History of Poland, under the date 1598, relates a miraculous event which happened to the venerable Stanislas, one of the luminaries of the Order of Saint Dominic in Poland. One day, whilst this religious, full of charity for the departed, recited the rosary, he saw appear before him a soul, all enveloped in flames. As she besought him to have pity on her and to alleviate the intolerable suffering which the fire of divine justice caused her to endure, the holy man asked her if this fire was more painful than that of earth. "Ah," she cried, "all the fires of the earth compared to that of purgatory are like a refreshing breeze." Stanislas could scarcely believe it. "I wish," he said, "to have proof. If God will permit, for your relief and for the good of my soul, I consent to suffer a part of your pains." Alas, you could not do this. However, God will permit you to feel it in a light degree. Stretch forth your hand. Chosa extended his hand, and the departed let fall a drop of sweat, or at least of a liquid which resembled it. At the same time, the religious uttered a piercing cry and fell fainting to the ground. So frighteningly intense was the pain, his brethren ran to the spot and hastened to give him the assistance which his condition required. When restored to consciousness, he related the terrible event which had occurred and of which there had been a visible proof. "Ah, my dear fathers," he continued, "if we knew the severity of the divine chastisements, we would never commit sin, or should we cease to do penance in this life in order to avoid expiation in the next." Stanislas was confined to his bed from that moment. He lived one more year in the most cruel suffering caused by this terrible wound. Then, for the last time, exhorting his brethren to remember the rigors of divine justice, he slept peacefully in the Lord. The historian adds that this example reanimated fervor in all the monasteries of the province. This experience which Stanislas has with the soul going through expiation in purgatory reminds us that this life on earth is a purification, and to live our lives in preparation for death and finally meeting our loving Creator. The following event took place in November 16, 1859 at Foligno, near Assisi, in Italy. There was at the convent of Franciscan tertiaries a sister named Teresa, who had been for so many years mistress of the novices, and who at the same time had charge of the sacristy of the community. She died suddenly, November 4th, 1859, of a stroke of apoplexy. 12 days later, in November 16, a sister named Anna Felicia, who succeeded her in her office, went to the sacristy and was about to enter when she heard moans which appeared to come from the interior of the room. Somewhat afraid, she hastened to open the door. There was no one. Again, she heard moans, and so distinctly that notwithstanding her ordinary courage, she felt herself overpowered by fear. "Jesus, Mary," she cried. "What can that be?" She had not finished speaking when she heard a plaintive voice accompanied with a painful sigh. "Oh my God, how I suffer." The sister, stupefied, immediately recognized the voice of poor Sister Teresa. Then the room was filled with a thick smoke, and the spirit of Sister Teresa appeared, moving towards the door and gliding along by the wall. Having reached the door, she cried out aloud, "Behold, a proof of the mercy of God." Saying these words, she struck the upper panel of the door, and there left a print of a right hand, burnt in the wood, as with a red-hot iron. She then disappeared. Sister Anna Felicia was left half dead with fright. She burst forth into loud cries for help. One of her companions ran, then a second, and finally the whole community. They pressed around her, astonished to find a strong odor of burnt wood. Sister Anna Felicia told of what had occurred and showed them the terrible impression on the door. They instantly recognized the hand of Sister Teresa, which had been remarkably small. Terrified, they took to flight and ran to the choir, where they passed the night in prayer and penance for the departed. And the following morning, all received Holy Communion for the repose of her soul. The news spread outside the convent walls, and many communities in the city united their prayers with those of the Franciscans. On the third day, November 18th, Sister Anna Felicia, on going in the evening to her cell, heard herself called by her name and recognized perfectly the voice of Sister Teresa. At the same instant, a globe of brilliant light appeared before her, illuminating her cell with the brightness of daylight. She then heard Sister Teresa pronounce these words in a joyful and triumphant voice: "I died on Friday, the day of the Passion, and behold, on a Friday I enter into eternal glory. Be strong to bear the cross. Be courageous to suffer. Love poverty." Then adding affectionately, "Adieu, adieu, adieu." She became transfigured, and like a light, white, dazzling cloud, she rose towards heaven and disappeared. This story reveals to us the pains experienced by those in the place of expiation and purgatory, and how much these souls are in need of our prayers. We should try and make it a habit, whenever we can, to offer a Mass up for these souls, or have a devotion for these souls in purgatory. And remember, these souls, while they cannot pray for themselves, can help us a lot with their prayers when we seek salvation. There was in Northumberland a man named Dhel, who, with his family, led a most Christian life. He fell sick, and his malady, increasing day by day, he was soon reduced to extremity and died, to the great desolation and grief of his wife and children. The latter passed the night in tears by the remains, but the following day, before his interment, they saw him suddenly return to life, arise, and place himself in a sitting posture. At this sight, they were all seized with fear, that they all took to flight, with the exception of his wife, who, trembling, remained alone with her risen husband. He reassured her immediately. "Fear not," he said. "It is God who restores me to my life. He wishes to show in my person a man raised from the dead. I have yet long to live upon this earth, but my new life will be very different from the one I led before." Then he arose, full of health, went straight to the chapel or church of the place, and remained there long in prayer. He returned home, only to take leave of those who had been dearest to him upon earth, to whom he declared that he would live only to prepare himself for death, and advised them to do likewise. Then, having divided his property into 3 parts, He gave one to his children, another to his wife, and reserved a third part to give in alms. When he had distributed all to the poor and reduced himself to extreme indigence, he went and knocked on the door of a monastery and begged the abbot to receive him as a penitent religious, who would be a servant to all the others. The abbot gave him a retired cell, which he occupied for the rest of his life. 3 exercises divided his time: prayer, the hardest of labor, and extraordinary penances. The most rigorous fasts he counted as nothing. In winter, he was seen to plunge himself into frozen water and remain there for hours and hours in prayer, while he recited the whole Psalter of David. The mortified life of Dhel, his downcast eyes, even his features, indicated a soul struck with fear of the judgments of God. He kept a perpetual silence, but on being pressed to relate, for the edification of others, what God had manifested to him after death, he thus described his vision. On leaving my body, I was received by a benevolent person who took me under his guidance. His face was brilliant, and he appeared surrounded by light. He arrived at a large, deep valley of immense extent, all fire on one side, all ice and snow on the other. This mysterious valley was filled with innumerable souls, which, tossed by a furious tempest, threw themselves from one side to the other. When they could no longer endure the violence of the fire, they sought relief amidst the ice and snow, but finding only a new torture, they cast themselves again into the midst of the flames. I saw a multitude of souls which suffered without ever having repose. Their very aspect inspired me with fear. I thought at first that I saw hell, but my guide, who walked with me, turned to me and said, "No, this is not as you think, the hell of the reprobate. Do you know what this place is?" "No," I answered. "Know that this valley you see is the place where souls of those are punished, who during their life have neglected to confess their sins and who have deferred their conversion to the end. Thanks to a special mercy of the Lord, they have had the grace of sincerely repenting before death, of confessing and detesting their sins. This is why they are not damned, and on the great day of judgment will enter the kingdom of heaven. Several of them will obtain their deliverance before that time by the merits of prayers, alms, and fasts offered in their favor by the living, and especially in virtue of the holy sacrifice of the Mass offered for their relief." Such was the recital of Dhel when asked why he rudely treated his body. To the day when it pleased God to call him to himself, he never ceased to afflict his body, and although broken down with age, he would accept no alleviation. If you seek another video which will bring you closer to God, click on the video above, and I will catch you on the other side.